Hello, and welcome to Sleep Science Time. I'm absolutely delighted you found your way here tonight, on this most spooky of evenings. Happy Halloween! Whether you're winding down after a night of trick-or-treating, recovering from a Halloween party, or perhaps you're one of those people who celebrates the entire season, and this is just the main event, welcome. Whether you're a long-time viewer who's been with me through human evolution and simulation theory, or whether you've just stumbled across this video because the algorithm decided you needed to learn about zombies whilst trying to sleep on Halloween night, you're exactly where you need to be, even if that seems like a slightly concerning thing to say in a video about the undead. Now I know what you're thinking. Zombies? Really? On a science channel? But here's the thing that should genuinely unsettle you as you're lying there in the dark. Zombies aren't entirely fictional. I don't mean the Hollywood version, the shambling corpses that somehow keep walking despite having no functioning cardiovascular system. I mean the real parasites, the actual diseases, the terrifying biological mechanisms that exist right now, today, that turn living creatures into mindless puppets controlled by something else. Nature invented zombies long before Hollywood did, and frankly the real versions are considerably more disturbing because they actually exist, and you can't just switch them off when they get too frightening. Right now, as you're settling in for sleep, there are ants walking through rainforests with fungus growing out of their heads, controlling their every movement. There are deer stumbling through American forests with holes in their brains, exhibiting behavior so disturbing that hunters have nicknamed them zombie deer. There are parasites that can alter human behavior, potentially affecting a third of the world's population without most people even knowing they're infected. And there are diseases, real documented diseases that cause symptoms remarkably similar to what we see in zombie films. Aggression, biting, loss of higher cognitive function, an unstoppable urge to attack others. So the question isn't really, could zombies exist? Because in various forms they already do. The question is, could it happen to us? Could there be a real zombie outbreak in humans? And if so, what would it actually look like? Would we survive? And here's the truly unsettling bit. Governments around the world, including the CDC in America, actually have zombie outbreak preparedness plans. Now, they claim it's just a fun way to teach disaster preparedness, but one does have to wonder, doesn't one? Why put in all that effort for something that's purely hypothetical? I'm curious, what brought you here tonight? Are you a horror fan who enjoys the intersection of science and scary stories? Perhaps you're lying there wondering if your survival plan for the zombie apocalypse would actually work. Or maybe you're just someone who finds falling asleep to discussions about brain-controlling parasites oddly soothing, which is a bit concerning, but I'm not here to judge. Leave me a comment and let me know. Do you think you'd survive a zombie outbreak? What's your survival strategy? I read every single comment, and on Halloween especially, I love hearing what keeps you curious, what keeps you up at night, sometimes quite literally. And if you find yourself enjoying this peculiar Halloween exploration into the science of zombies, I'd be ever so grateful if you'd tap that like button. It helps other people find these videos, people who are perhaps also lying awake on Halloween night wondering if there's a scientific basis for all those zombie films they've watched. And if you'd like more of these late-night wanderings through the creepier corners of science, do consider subscribing. There's something rather fun about building a community of people who gather here in the dark hours to explore the fascinating and occasionally terrifying realities hiding in the natural world. Right, let's talk about what we're covering tonight. We're going to start with nature's actual zombies, the parasites and fungi that are creating zombie-like creatures right now, today, in forests and fields around the world. Then we'll explore the diseases that could potentially create human zombies, things like rabies, prion diseases, and other neurological nightmares that are far more real than most people realize. After that, we'll do a proper scientific analysis. If a zombie outbreak actually happened, what would it look like? How would it spread? Could we stop it? And finally, because this is sleep science time, and we always venture into the more speculative territory, we'll look at the conspiracy theories, the dark possibilities, the questions about whether something might already be brewing in secret laboratories somewhere. The goal here, I should warn you, might actually be to keep you bolt upright until dawn rather than helping you drift off peacefully. This is a Halloween special after all, and some of what we're going to discuss is genuinely unsettling. Brain-controlling parasites, diseases that turn deer into actual zombies, conspiracy theories about secret laboratories. This isn't my usual soothing content, so fair warning. If you're looking for something gentle to help you sleep tonight, you might want to save this one for tomorrow and choose a different video. But if you're in the mood for something appropriately spooky, something that explores the real science behind zombies while still being delivered in that calm, conversational way, then settle in. Just don't say I didn't warn you when you find yourself wide awake at 2 a.m, mentally planning your zombie apocalypse survival strategy and questioning whether that strange noise outside is just the wind. Consider yourself properly warned. So, shall we begin? Let's start somewhere properly unsettling. The rainforest, where right now, at this very moment, cordyceps fungus is turning ants into zombies and has been doing so for millions of years. After all, if you want to understand whether humans could become zombies, it helps to understand the creatures that already are. Also, if you need to grab a drink, put on your pajamas or whatever you need to do, go and do that now. Just remember to keep the lights on. Right, let's travel to a rainforest, somewhere warm and humid, perhaps in Brazil or Thailand. The forest floor is alive with activity, ants marching in orderly lines, going about their business as ants do. But if you look closely, you'll notice something deeply wrong with one of them. This ant has left its colony, abandoned its duties as is climbing up a plant stem, higher and higher, compelled by an urge it doesn't understand and cannot resist. When it reaches a specific height, roughly 25 centimeters above the forest floor, always on the underside of a leaf, always facing north, it clamps its mandibles down on the leaf vein with such force that it can never let go, and then it dies. But it doesn't stay dead for long. A few days later, a stalk erupts from the back of the ant's head, growing upward, swelling at the tip. Eventually it bursts, releasing thousands of spores that rain down on the ant colony below, infecting more workers, starting the cycle again. The ant was never in control. From the moment it was infected, it was being piloted by something else. Cordyceps fungus, nature's perfect zombie maker. This is what an actual zombie looks like, and I'm afraid Hollywood rather undersold how disturbing it is. At least film zombies maintain some autonomy in their shambling about. This ant has been hijacked so completely that even the location and orientation of its death is predetermined by its puppet master. Cordyceps is a genus of parasitic fungi with over 400 species, each specialized to infect specific insects. The species that targets carpenter ants, Ophiocordyceps unilateralis, has been perfecting its gruesome technique for at least 48 million years. We know this because scientists have found fossilized leaves with the distinctive bite marks of zombie ants, frozen in their final moments. This isn't some recent evolutionary development. This is an ancient horror that's been running the same program for longer than humans have existed. Here's how it works, and fair warning, it's properly nightmarish. The spores land on an ant, penetrate its exoskeleton, and begin growing inside its body. The fungus spreads through the ant's tissues, but critically, it doesn't invade the brain. Instead, it forms a network around the brain, infiltrating the muscles, essentially creating a puppet whilst leaving the consciousness intact. There's some evidence suggesting the ant might be aware of what's happening, a passenger in its own body as something else takes the wheel. Once the fungus has sufficient control, it releases chemicals that alter the ant's behavior, compelling it to leave the colony and begin climbing. The ant will climb during the cooler morning hours when humidity is high, perfect conditions for fungal growth. It will select the exact right type of leaf, the exact right height, the exact right orientation. Then, the death bite, the mandibles locking down with such force that the ant's head muscles are destroyed in the process, ensuring it can never release its grip. The precision is remarkable and deeply unsettling. This isn't random, it's orchestrated. The fungus needs the ant to die in exactly the right place, at exactly the right height to maximize spore dispersal to the ant colony below. Too high, and the spores disperse too widely. Too low, and they don't spread far enough. Evolution, through millions of years of trial and error, has created a parasite that can control behavior with terrifying accuracy. Now I can hear you thinking, that's dreadful, but it's ants, not humans. Quite right. But Cordyceps isn't alone in its ability to create zombies. There's Toxoplasma gondii, a single-celled parasite that infects rats, and does something extraordinary. It makes them attracted to cat urine. Normally, rats are terrified of cats, as they should be, given that cats eat rats. But infected rats lose their fear, actually seek out the scent of cats, making them easy prey. The parasite needs to get inside a cat to complete its life cycle, so it's essentially hacked the rat's brain to deliver itself to its final destination. Here's where it gets personally relevant. Toxoplasma can infect humans. It's estimated that between 30 and 50% of the global human population carries it, often contracted from undercooked meat or contact with cat feces. Most people never know they're infected. It sits quietly in brain tissue, forming cysts. But there's growing evidence it might be subtly altering human behavior as well. Studies have linked Toxoplasma infection to increased risk-taking behavior, slower reaction times, even potential links to schizophrenia, though I should stress these findings are still being researched and debated. The point is, a parasite that controls animal behavior is living inside billions of human brains right now. Pleasant dreams. Then there are hairworms, parasites that infect crickets and grasshoppers. When the worm is ready to reproduce, it needs water, so it releases chemicals that drive its host to seek out water and jump in, drowning itself so the worm can emerge and complete its life cycle. You can watch videos of this online. crickets behaving erratically, desperately seeking water, throwing themselves into streams, and then a worm 3 times the length of the cricket's body emerging from its abdomen. Nature is magnificent and absolutely horrifying in equal measure. So we've established that zombie-making parasites exist. They're common, they're sophisticated, and some of them can infect humans. The question that should be keeping you awake, or perhaps helping you drift off depending on your disposition, is this. Could any of these jump species evolve, become something that turns humans into proper zombies? Cordyceps that infects humans? The scientific consensus is probably not. Cordyceps species are highly specialized. Each one has evolved over millions of years to target specific insects. The biological leap from insect to mammal, from ant to human, is enormous. Our immune systems are vastly more sophisticated, our bodies much larger, our brains considerably more complex. A fungus that's perfected at zombification would need to essentially start from scratch to colonize a human. But, and there's always a but, right? Evolution is creative given sufficient time and pressure. Fungi can adapt faster than we'd like, and climate change is pushing species into new territories, creating novel interactions between parasites and hosts that have never encountered each other before. It's unlikely, but unlikely isn't impossible. And that's the thought I'll leave you with as we move on to something considerably more plausible and honestly more terrifying. A virus that already creates zombie-like symptoms in humans and mammals, one that's been doing so for thousands of years, and one that still kills tens of thousands of people annually. Let's talk about rabies. Now, I need you to imagine something for me. You're going about your day, perfectly normal, when suddenly you're seized by an overwhelming, uncontrollable rage. Your throat begins to spasm at the mere thought of water, even though you're desperately thirsty. Bright lights become unbearable. You start producing excessive saliva, foaming at the mouth. Your behavior becomes erratic, aggressive. You have an overwhelming urge to bite people, and then, within days, you're dead. No cure, no treatment that works once symptoms appear, just an inevitable descent into a nightmare that ends in death. This isn't a zombie film. This is rabies. And it's real. It's out there right now. And it's possibly the closest thing we have to an actual zombie virus. Rabies is caused by a virus, lyssavirus, that's transmitted through the saliva of infected animals, usually via bites. Once it enters your body, it doesn't rush to your brain immediately. Instead, it travels slowly along your nerves, creeping toward your central nervous system at a rate of about a few millimeters per day. This journey can take weeks or even months depending on where you were bitten. A bite on your foot. The virus has a long journey ahead. A bite on your face. It reaches your brain much faster. During this incubation period, you feel fine, completely normal. You've no idea that death is slowly making its way toward your brain. But once it reaches your brain, once symptoms appear, you're effectively doomed. The fatality rate for symptomatic rabies is nearly 100%. There have been only a handful of survivors in recorded history, and most were left with severe neurological damage. It's rather like the most patient serial killer in nature, isn't it? Taking its time, travelling in secret, and then striking with absolute certainty when it finally arrives. Let's talk about those symptoms, because they're eerily, disturbingly similar to zombie mythology. The rage, the aggression, the loss of higher cognitive function. Infected individuals become violent, attacking others without provocation. The hydrophobia, the fear of water, happens because the throat muscles spasm violently at the attempt to swallow. Your body essentially prevents you from drinking, even though you're desperately thirsty. Why? Because the virus is clever. It needs to stay in your saliva to spread to new hosts, and if you're swallowing constantly, you're washing the virus down into your stomach where it's less useful. So it's hijacked your neurology to maximize its transmission chances. Then there's the biting. Rabies makes infected animals, and occasionally humans, extraordinarily aggressive and prone to biting. Again, this isn't random. The virus is in the saliva, and biting is how it spreads. The behavioral changes aren't side effects. They're features, carefully crafted by evolution to turn the host into an effective transmission vehicle. You become essentially a biological weapon, designed to spread the virus as widely as possible before you die. Are you still comfortable there? Not too unsettled? Because here's where it gets properly frightening. Rabies is everywhere. It exists on every continent except Antarctica. In the UK, we're fortunate. We eliminated it from terrestrial mammals decades ago through strict quarantine and vaccination programs. But in much of the world, particularly in Asia and Africa, rabies kills tens of thousands of people every year, mostly children. Dogs are the primary vector, though bats, raccoons, foxes, virtually any mammal can carry it. And here's the thing that should genuinely concern you. If you're bitten by a rabid animal, you have a window of time to get post-exposure prophylaxis, a series of vaccines and immunoglobulin injections that can stop the virus before it reaches your brain. But that window closes. Once symptoms appear, once the virus has reached your central nervous system, medicine can't save you. You will die, and it will be awful. The final stages involve seizures, hallucinations, paralysis, coma, death. It takes about a week from first symptoms to death, a week of steadily deteriorating neurological function while you're still conscious enough to know what's happening. Now, why am I telling you all this cheerful information on Halloween night as you're trying to sleep? Because I want you to understand something crucial. Zombie viruses aren't hypothetical future nightmares. They exist. Rabies is a zombie virus. It changes behavior, creates aggression, spreads through biting, has a near 100% fatality rate, and turns the infected into vectors for transmission. The only significant difference between rabies and fictional zombie viruses is that rabies kills relatively quickly, and the infected don't rise from the dead afterward. But in terms of creating zombie-like behavior in living hosts, it's already here. Could rabies evolve to become more like the zombies in films? Could it extend the symptomatic period, keep people mobile and aggressive for longer whilst they spread the infection? Viruses mutate constantly. Evolution is always working. The current strain of rabies kills too quickly to be an effective pandemic pathogen. An infected person becomes symptomatic, becomes aggressive, but also becomes obviously ill and dies within days. That limits spread. But a variant that kept people functional longer, that maintained aggression without the obvious foaming and seizures, that would be considerably more dangerous. Essentially, rabies just needs to learn a bit of patience, spread more subtly, and we'd have a proper zombie outbreak on our hands. No supernatural resurrection required, just a virus being slightly more effective at what it already does. The scientific community watches rabies carefully for exactly this reason. Not because they expect zombie apocalypse, but because it's a neurotropic virus, one that specifically targets the nervous system and alters behavior in ways that benefit the virus. Understanding how it works helps us understand how other viruses might evolve similar capabilities. There have been documented cases throughout history that, when you read them, sound remarkably like zombie attacks. Medieval accounts of people bitten by rabid wolves, becoming violent and biting others, spreading the infection through villages. Before we understood germ theory, before we knew about viruses, how would you explain someone who was fine yesterday and today is foaming at the mouth, attacking people, and can't drink water? You'd probably think they were possessed, cursed, or perhaps returning from the dead as something unholy. Rabies may well have contributed to historical vampire and zombie mythology, real disease creating legends of the undead. So the question isn't really whether a zombie virus could exist. It does exist. The question is whether it could spread efficiently enough to cause a proper outbreak, a collapse of civilization scenario. And for that, we need to look at other diseases, particularly ones that affect the brain in even more disturbing ways. Have you heard of prion diseases? No? Well, settle in, because we're about to discuss something that makes rabies look almost pleasant by comparison. At least rabies is caused by a virus, something alive that we can potentially fight. Prions are something else entirely, something that challenges our very understanding of what can cause disease, and they're creating actual literal zombie deer right now, wandering through forests across North America. Right, okay, let's discuss something that makes viruses and parasites look straightforward by comparison. I want you to think about what causes disease. Bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites, all of these are alive, complex organisms, or at least virus-like entities that hijack our cells. But what if I told you there's something that causes disease, destroys brains, creates zombie-like behavior, and it's not even alive? It's just a protein. A misfolded protein that has the terrifying ability to make other proteins misfold, spreading like a corrupt file through your brain, turning healthy tissue into something resembling a sponge. They're called prions, and they're responsible for some of the most disturbing diseases known to medicine. Prion diseases include things like Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in humans, mad cow disease in cattle, scrapie in sheep, and the one that's making headlines right now, the one that should genuinely concern you, chronic wasting disease in deer and elk. The hunters call them zombie deer, and once you see one, you'll understand why immediately. Picture a deer, but wrong. Emaciated, ribs showing through dull, patchy fur. It's drooling excessively, stumbling as it walks, head hanging low. It's lost its fear of humans, wandering into areas it would normally avoid. Its behavior is erratic, sometimes aggressive, sometimes just standing motionless, staring at nothing. It's not coordinated enough to run properly anymore, and it's inexorably dying, brain tissue literally dissolving into a sponge-like consistency riddled with holes. There's no cure, no treatment, just a slow, inevitable deterioration until death. Sound familiar? It's essentially a zombie, just a real one that's actually shambling through American forests right now whilst you're tucked up safely in bed. Probably safely. We'll get to the can it infect humans question shortly, and I'm afraid the answer isn't as reassuring as you'd hope. Chronic wasting disease has been spreading across North America for decades. It was first identified in Colorado in the 1960s, but it's now been detected in at least 30 US states and several Canadian provinces. In some areas, infection rates in deer populations exceed 50%. Half the deer in some regions are infected with the disease that's invariably fatal and creates zombie-like behavior. The disease spreads through bodily fluids, contaminated soil, even from mother to fetus. And here's the truly frightening bit. Prions are nearly indestructible. They can survive in soil for years, resist standard sterilization procedures, withstand temperatures that would destroy any virus or bacteria. You can't burn them out, you can't wash them away. They just persist in the environment, waiting for the next host. Now, chronic wasting disease hasn't jumped to humans yet, at least not that we know of. Studies suggest there's a species barrier that makes transmission from deer to humans difficult, but difficult isn't impossible, and we've seen prion diseases jump species barriers before. Mad cow disease, bovine spongiform encephalopathy, jumped to humans in the 1990s, causing variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Over 200 people died, most in the UK, from eating contaminated beef. The cattle had been fed protein supplements made from other cattle, creating a cannibalism loop that allowed the prions to spread. When humans ate infected beef, particularly nervous tissue, some contracted the disease. The symptoms in humans are nightmarish. Initial psychiatric symptoms, depression, anxiety, then rapidly progressing dementia, loss of coordination, involuntary movements, eventual complete cognitive collapse. From first symptoms to death typically takes about a year, and throughout that year, you're aware of your brain dissolving, your personality disintegrating, your body losing control. There's no treatment, nothing medicine can do except make you comfortable whilst you die. So could chronic wasting disease jump to humans? Scientists say it's unlikely but not impossible. The species barrier exists, but it's not absolute. There have been experimental studies where prions have adapted to cross barriers they initially couldn't. Evolution works on prions too, in a sense. Variants that can infect new hosts will spread in those hosts. The more humans are exposed, through hunting, field dressing deer, consuming venison, the more opportunities for a variant to emerge that can infect us. And if it does, if zombie deer disease becomes a human disease, we'd be facing something genuinely apocalyptic. Why? Because prions are invisible, indestructible, and have extraordinarily long incubation periods. You could be infected today and not show symptoms for years, even decades. Meanwhile, you're potentially shedding prions, contaminating environments, possibly spreading it to others without anyone knowing. By the time symptoms appear, you've been a walking transmission vector for years. It's rather like the slowest zombie outbreak imaginable, isn't it? Everyone infected is just walking around normally, going about their day, and then years later, suddenly everyone starts developing holes in their brains simultaneously. Terribly inconvenient for pandemic response planning. Have you ever wondered why the CDC and other health organizations seem oddly prepared for zombie scenarios? They've published zombie preparedness guides, run zombie outbreak simulations. Officially, it's described as a fun way to teach disaster preparedness, a way to engage the public with emergency planning using pop culture references. But some researchers have suggested another reason: prion diseases. A widespread prion outbreak would look remarkably similar to a zombie apocalypse. Slow progression, inevitable fatality, behavioral changes, no cure, environmental contamination that persists for years. Planning for zombies is, in a very real sense, planning for the worst-case prion scenario. Now let me tell you about another disease, one from history that sounds absolutely like something from a zombie film but was entirely real. Encephalitis lethargica, also known as sleepy sickness. Between 1915 and 1926, this mysterious disease affected about 1 million people worldwide. The symptoms varied wildly, but typically started with fever, headache, and extreme lethargy. Patients would fall into sleep-like states lasting days, weeks, even months. Some never woke up. Others woke but were profoundly changed, exhibiting Parkinson's-like symptoms, behavioral abnormalities, some becoming violent and aggressive, others becoming nearly catatonic. The truly disturbing cases were those who survived the acute phase, but were left in a state described as living statues. Conscious but unable to move, aware but locked inside unresponsive bodies, sometimes for decades. When neurologist Oliver Sacks treated survivors in the 1960s with L-Dopa, some temporarily awakened after being essentially frozen for 40 years. His book, Awakenings, documents these cases, and it reads like something from a horror novel, except it was real. These people were zombies in the truest sense, alive but not living, conscious but not able to act, trapped inside their own bodies. We still don't know what caused encephalitis lethargica. It disappeared as mysteriously as it appeared around 1926 and hasn't returned in epidemic form. Theories range from viral infection to autoimmune response, possibly triggered by the 1918 flu pandemic. But the fact that it existed, affected millions, created zombie-like states, and we still don't understand it. That should unsettle you a bit. There are diseases that can turn humans into living statues, and we don't know why or how, and we can't guarantee they won't return. Are you still awake? Still comfortable? Because I haven't even mentioned the really speculative possibilities yet. What if someone deliberately created a zombie pathogen? What if military bioweapons research accidentally produced something that alters behavior, increases aggression, reduces higher cognitive function? We know governments have researched biological weapons. It's documented historical fact. The question is, what exactly have they created in those secure laboratories? And more importantly, what might leak out? There have been conspiracy theories for years about laboratory accidents, about engineered pathogens designed to incapacitate rather than kill, about experiments in behavior modification through biological agents. Most are baseless speculation, but the thing about conspiracy theories is they occasionally turn out to be true. We did find out about MKUltra, about Tuskegee, about all sorts of unethical experiments that sounded like paranoid fantasies until declassified documents proved they were real. So when we ask, could zombies exist, we're not just asking about natural evolution of parasites and viruses. We're also asking, could they be made? Could a sufficiently sophisticated bioweapon create zombie-like behavior? The answer, uncomfortably, is probably yes. We understand enough neuroscience, enough about behavior-altering parasites and viruses, that engineering something similar isn't beyond possibility. Whether anyone has actually done so is another question entirely, and one I suspect we wouldn't be told about even if they had. But let's bring this back from speculation to reality. What we know for certain is this. diseases that create zombie-like symptoms exist. They're out there right now. Rabies, prion diseases, various neurological conditions that alter behavior and consciousness in disturbing ways. They haven't caused civilization-ending outbreaks, but they could, under the right circumstances, with the right mutations or the wrong laboratory accident. The zombie apocalypse isn't impossible, it's just unlikely, and unlikely isn't never. Which brings us to our next question. If it did happen, if a real zombie outbreak began, what would it actually look like? Could we survive it? Would the military save us, or would society collapse? Let's find out. Right, let's do something rather fun, shall we? Let's assume the worst has happened. A pathogen has emerged, whether through natural evolution, laboratory accident, or deliberate creation, that creates zombie-like behavior in humans. Aggression, loss of higher cognitive function, compulsion to bite and spread the infection, reduced pain response, impaired coordination. Essentially, rabies but more contagious, and with a longer symptomatic period where victims remain mobile. The zombie outbreak has begun. What actually happens next? First, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the shambling corpse in the room. Hollywood zombies are biologically impossible. The classic image of the undead, corpses rising from graves, continuing to function despite having no heartbeat, no respiration, no metabolism, that's pure fantasy. Dead tissue doesn't move, I'm afraid. If you've been dead long enough to be buried, you're staying buried, regardless of how exciting that would be for the funeral industry's profit margins. What we're talking about is living humans infected with something that makes them behave like movie zombies, not actual reanimated corpses. That distinction matters enormously for how an outbreak would actually progress. So patient zero gets infected. Let's say it's a novel prion disease or a mutated rabies variant. They start showing symptoms, confusion, aggression, biting behavior. In the modern world, what happens? They're probably taken to hospital. Medical staff attempt to restrain and treat them. Some staff get bitten. Those staff get infected. Now you have multiple infected individuals in a medical setting, and here's where it gets interesting. Hospitals have excellent containment protocols for infectious diseases. We've learned from Ebola, from SARS, from COVID. Isolation procedures, protective equipment, rapid identification of contacts. A zombie outbreak would initially be treated as a disease outbreak, which it is, and public health infrastructure would swing into action. Would it be contained at this stage? Possibly, if we're lucky and if response is quick. But let's assume it's not. Let's assume it spreads beyond that initial hospital, into the community. Now you have dozens, then hundreds of infected individuals, all exhibiting violent behavior, all potentially spreading infection through bites or bodily fluids. At what point does the public realize this isn't just a disease outbreak, but something that creates violent, aggressive victims? When do the zombie comparisons start? Social media would explode, obviously. Videos of infected people attacking others, behaving erratically, would go viral within hours. The word zombie would start trending. Panic would set in fast, possibly faster than the actual disease spreads. People would flee cities, heading for rural areas, potentially spreading infection to regions that weren't yet affected. Hoarding would begin immediately. Supermarkets stripped bare, fuel stations overwhelmed. The panic might be more dangerous than the infection itself, at least initially. Governments would declare states of emergency. Military and police would be mobilized, quarantine zones established. But here's a question worth considering. Would people comply? If you're told to stay in your home while infected individuals roam outside, would you? Or would you grab your family and flee, potentially taking the infection with you? Humans are remarkably good at following rules right up until those rules conflict with survival instinct, and then all bets are off. Let's talk about the infected themselves, the zombies. What are their actual capabilities and limitations? They're still human, still bound by human biology. They need oxygen, which means they need functioning lungs and hearts. They need energy, which means they need to eat, and I don't just mean human flesh. A human body burns roughly 2,000 calories a day at rest, more if you're constantly moving and attacking people. Zombies would be desperately hungry, but not necessarily for brains, probably just for anything edible, which rather ruins the dramatic image of single-minded human hunters, doesn't it? Run! The zombies are coming. They're after our packed lunches. They'd be vulnerable to injury. Break a leg and you can't walk, infected or not. Severe blood loss incapacitates regardless of whether you feel pain. Dehydration would kill within days. Exposure to cold would cause hypothermia. Infected individuals might have reduced pain response and impaired judgment, making them dangerous and persistent, but they're not invulnerable. They're just sick humans, and sick humans are actually quite fragile. Decay would be a factor too. Not the Hollywood walking corpse decay, but the natural deterioration of a body that's not being properly maintained. Infected individuals probably aren't washing, eating balanced meals, or seeking shelter. They'd develop infections from untreated wounds, diseases from unsanitary conditions, organ failure from dehydration and malnutrition. Most infected would probably die within weeks from secondary causes, even if the primary infection didn't kill them. So could they overrun civilization? Unlikely, honestly. Humans are extraordinarily good at killing things when we put our minds to it. We've driven countless species to extinction with far less motivation than our own survival. Military response would be brutal but effective. Infected individuals, no matter how aggressive, can't withstand bullets, explosives, or organized defensive positions. They can't plan, can't use tools, can't coordinate attacks. They're just sick humans stumbling around, and we have tanks. The bigger threat would be social collapse from panic, rather than from the infected themselves. If people abandon cities en masse, if supply chains break down, if law and order disintegrates because everyone's fled, that's when you get a proper apocalypse scenario. Not because zombies conquered humanity, but because humanity panicked and destroyed its own infrastructure. The zombies would just be the catalyst. Are you starting to feel a bit more confident about surviving? You should. The zombie apocalypse, if it happened, would be frightening, certainly, but probably not civilization ending. Not because zombies aren't dangerous, but because humans are more dangerous, especially when we're organized and scared. But there's one more scenario we should consider, one that's darker and more plausible than Hollywood zombies. What if it's not a zombie outbreak, but something more subtle? What if the pathogen doesn't create obvious raging infected, but instead slowly degrades cognitive function, increases aggression just slightly, reduces empathy and impulse control gradually? A prion disease that takes years to progress, during which infected individuals seem mostly normal, but are slowly becoming more irritable, more violent, less rational. That would spread undetected for years. By the time anyone realised it was a disease and not just social decline, millions could be infected. And how do you quarantine against something that takes years to become symptomatic? How do you even identify who's infected when they mostly seem fine? That's a zombie scenario that doesn't look like a zombie scenario, and it's considerably more plausible than the Hollywood version. Still, even in that case, humans would adapt. We always do. We'd develop tests, treatments, containment strategies. We'd survive, even if changed. The question isn't whether we'd survive a zombie outbreak. The question is what we'd become in the process of surviving it. Would we maintain our humanity, our compassion, our social structures? Or would the fear and violence required to survive turn us into something else? Something perhaps not much better than the zombies themselves. But I'm getting ahead of myself venturing into philosophy when we've still got conspiracy theories to explore. Government bioweapons, secret outbreaks already happening, zombie preparedness plans that might be less hypothetical than claimed. So let's venture into the properly speculative territory, shall we? Let's talk about what might already be brewing in secret laboratories, what governments might know that we don't, and why the CDC has a zombie outbreak response plan. Because it's Halloween, and if we're going to explore zombies, we might as well go all the way down the rabbit hole. So, let's venture into the shadows, shall we? We've covered the science, the plausible scenarios, the documented diseases that create zombie-like behaviour. Now let's talk about what keeps conspiracy theorists awake at night, and honestly, some of these theories are disturbing enough that you might want to check your doors are locked before we continue. Not because zombies are real, but because the scenarios people have imagined are rather creative in their darkness. Let's start with the obvious one. Government bioweapons programs. We know these existed. That's not conspiracy. That's documented history. The US had extensive biological weapons research until officially shutting it down in 1969. The Soviet Union had biopreparat, employing thousands of scientists working on weaponized anthrax, plague, smallpox. Other nations have had similar programs. The question isn't whether governments researched bioweapons, it's what exactly they created, what they're still working on in secret, and what might accidentally escape from secure facilities. Here's where it gets interesting. An ideal bioweapon doesn't necessarily kill quickly. Dead enemies aren't as strategically useful as incapacitated ones. A pathogen that creates chaos, overwhelms medical infrastructure, causes panic and social breakdown whilst keeping victims alive and mobile. That's considerably more effective than something that just kills quickly. And what better way to create chaos than a disease that makes infected individuals violent, aggressive, and dangerous to everyone around them? It's rather elegant in a horrifying sort of way, isn't it? You don't need to invade a country if you can just make its population attack itself. Let the zombies do the work whilst you sit back with a cup of tea, waiting for things to settle down. Saves on ammunition costs, though I imagine the ethics committee meetings were rather awkward. Conspiracy theorists point to several concerning facts. First, the CDC genuinely does have a zombie preparedness plan. They published it in 2011, complete with graphics of zombies and tongue-in-cheek advice about emergency supplies. Officially, it's described as a creative way to teach disaster preparedness, using zombie popularity to engage the public with serious emergency planning. But why zombies specifically? Why not earthquakes or floods or any other disaster? Some theorists suggest it's because a real zombie-like outbreak is considered a plausible threat, and this was a way to prepare the public without causing panic. Then there's Fort Detrick in Maryland, the US Army's primary biodefense facility. In 2019, the CDC issued a cease and desist order, shutting down research temporarily due to safety violations related to disposal of hazardous waste. The exact details were never fully disclosed, classified for national security. The shutdown happened just months before COVID-19 emerged, which conspiracy theorists noted with interest, though I should stress there's no credible evidence linking the two, but it does raise questions. What were they working on? What safety violations occurred? And were those violations serious enough that something might have escaped? There's also the curious case of the Miami cannibal in 2012. A man attacked another man on a causeway in broad daylight, biting his face, continuing the attack even when shot by police. Initial reports claimed he was on bath salts, synthetic drugs that can cause violent psychosis, but toxicology reports found only marijuana in his system. No bath salts, no explanation for the extraordinarily violent zombie-like behavior. Was it just psychosis? Or was it possibly an early case of something else, something quickly covered up? Probably just psychosis, but conspiracy theorists point to other similar incidents worldwide, cases of unexplained extreme violence and biting behavior, and wonder if there's a pattern being ignored or suppressed. Let's talk about the zombie survival guide and World War Z author Max Brooks. His father is Mel Brooks, the famous filmmaker, but Max became fascinated with zombie preparedness, writing detailed guides on surviving outbreaks. Here's the interesting bit. He's consulted with military and government agencies on disaster planning. Why would governments consult a fiction author about zombies unless they considered zombie-like scenarios genuinely possible? Brooks himself has suggested that zombie preparedness is useful because it forces you to plan for worst-case scenarios where infrastructure collapses and you can't rely on external help. But some wonder if there's more to it, if his work served as cover for actual planning for actual zombie-like outbreak scenarios. Now, are you still with me? Has the Halloween atmosphere got you checking the shadows in your room? Because we need to talk about something even more disturbing. What if it's already happening, just slowly? What if there's a pathogen spreading right now that is gradually degrading cognitive function and increasing aggression across populations, and we've just normalized it as social decline? Think about it. Increasing rates of rage incidents, road rage, air rage, people becoming more aggressive, less empathetic, more prone to violence over minor provocations, rising rates of neurological disorders, cognitive decline appearing earlier in life, behavioral changes dismissed as stress or modern life. What if it's not social media and stress causing these changes? What if there's an underlying biological cause, a slow-acting prion or virus that's been spreading for decades, gradually zombifying humanity so slowly that we're adapting to it as the new normal? Chronic wasting disease in deer has been spreading for over 50 years. What if a human equivalent has been spreading too, just with such a long incubation period and such subtle initial symptoms that we haven't recognized it as a disease? We only test for prions when someone's already showing severe symptoms. How many people might be in earlier stages becoming more irritable, more aggressive, less rational, and we're just attributing it to personality or stress? There are conspiracy theorists who believe this is exactly what's happening. that zombie deer disease has already jumped to humans and authorities are covering it up to prevent panic. They point to increasing rates of neurological problems, to strange behavioural changes in populations, to the fact that prion testing isn't routine and wouldn't catch early-stage infection anyway. Is there evidence for this? Not really. But absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, especially if nobody's looking for it specifically. Then there's the very dark possibility of deliberate release. Not by governments, but by accelerationists, people who actively want civilization to collapse. There are online communities that discuss triggering apocalyptic scenarios, and a zombie outbreak would certainly qualify. With sufficient knowledge of biology and access to laboratory equipment, which is becoming cheaper and more available through DIY biology movements, could someone deliberately create and release a zombie pathogen? The terrifying answer is possibly. CRISPR gene editing technology, advanced virology knowledge, all of this is increasingly accessible. Most scientists working in these fields are responsible and ethical, but it only takes one person with the wrong motivations. We're entering an era where bioterrorism doesn't require state resources, just expertise and equipment that's increasingly within reach of individuals. Creating something that alters behavior, increases aggression, spreads through contact. That's not science fiction anymore, it's plausible biotechnology. So happy Halloween, everyone. Sleep well, knowing that zombie outbreaks could potentially be ordered online by anyone with a biology degree and questionable life choices. Technology really has made everything more accessible, hasn't it? Democracy of the apocalypse. But let's pull back from the edge of paranoia for a moment. Most of these theories, whilst creative and disturbing, lack solid evidence. The Miami cannibal was probably just psychosis, tragic but explainable. Fort Detrick's shutdown was probably routine safety issues, not escaped zombie viruses. The CDC's zombie plan is probably exactly what they claim: creative public education. And rising aggression in society is probably due to social media, economic stress, political polarization, all the usual suspects, not secret brain-eating prions. The thing about conspiracy theories is they often contain a grain of truth wrapped in layers of speculation. Yes, governments research bioweapons. Yes, laboratory accidents happen. Yes, diseases can alter behavior. Yes, we're probably not being told everything about classified research. But jumping from governments do secret research to they've created zombies and are covering up outbreaks requires evidence we simply don't have. That said, and this is important, just because most conspiracy theories are wrong doesn't mean all of them are. History is full of conspiracies that turned out to be true. The challenge is distinguishing plausible concerns from paranoid fantasy, and that's considerably harder than it sounds, especially at midnight on Halloween when you're alone in the dark thinking about zombie deer and laboratory accidents. So where does that leave us? The honest answer is uncertain. Could zombies exist? Yes, in various forms they already do. Could there be a zombie outbreak? Possibly, under certain circumstances. Are governments hiding secret zombie research? Probably not, but we can't be completely certain. Is society slowly being zombified by an undetected pathogen? Almost certainly not, but the possibility can't be entirely ruled out. And that uncertainty, that inability to completely dismiss even the most disturbing possibilities, that's what keeps conspiracy theories alive. We want certainty, we want to know we're safe, and when we can't have that, Our minds fill in the gaps with possibilities, some reasonable, some terrifying. But let's bring this back to reality, back to what we actually know rather than what we fear. Because the real story, the scientific story, is fascinating enough without inventing secret laboratories and government cover-ups. Right, okay, let's step back from the shadows and into the light, shall we? We've wandered through parasitic fungi and brain-destroying prions, government conspiracies, and secret laboratories. Now it's time to ask, what do we actually know, stripped of speculation and Halloween atmosphere? Here's the reality. Zombie-like pathogens exist. Cordyceps controls insect behavior with terrifying precision. Toxoplasma alters behavior in rats and possibly humans. Rabies creates aggression, biting behavior, and near-certain death. Prion diseases destroy brains and create disturbing behavioral changes. These aren't hypothetical. They're documented, studied, real. Nature invented zombies millions of years before Hollywood did. Could these diseases evolve or be engineered to create a proper zombie outbreak in humans? Theoretically possible, but highly unlikely. The biological barriers are substantial. Cordyceps is specialized for insects. Jumping to humans would require evolutionary changes so extensive it's essentially implausible. Rabies kills too quickly to cause pandemic spread. Prion diseases progress too slowly or too obviously to create movie-style zombies. Each disease that creates zombie-like symptoms has limitations that prevent it from causing civilization-ending outbreaks. But here's what we should take seriously. Emerging diseases are real threats. Climate change is pushing species into new territories, creating novel interactions between pathogens and hosts. Deforestation brings humans into contact with wildlife diseases we've never encountered. Global travel means diseases can spread worldwide in days. Antibiotic resistance is making infections harder to treat. These are genuine concerns that don't require conspiracy theories or zombie mythology to be frightening. The real lesson from exploring zombies isn't prepare for the undead apocalypse. It's understand how diseases emerge, spread and impact society. Everything we've discussed, the behavioral changes, the transmission through bites, the difficulty of containment, these are relevant to real disease outbreaks. COVID-19 showed us how quickly a novel pathogen can disrupt global civilization, how panic spreads faster than infection, how social structures strain under pandemic pressure. We don't need zombies to experience aspects of apocalyptic scenarios. We've lived through milder versions already. So should you worry about zombies? No, not really. Should you think about emergency preparedness, understand disease transmission, maintain healthy skepticism about both official narratives and conspiracy theories? Yes, absolutely. The zombie apocalypse probably isn't coming, but being prepared for disasters in general is simply sensible. And if you're lying there now, slightly unsettled by everything we've discussed, let me offer you this comfort. Humans are survivors. We've endured ice ages, plagues, wars, catastrophes of every imaginable kind. We're clever, adaptable, and remarkably difficult to exterminate. If a zombie outbreak did occur, we'd probably survive it. Not through individual heroics, but through collective response, scientific understanding, and our species' stubborn refusal to go extinct quietly. Well, that brings us to the end of this story. If you're still here, still awake despite my best efforts to help you sleep, while simultaneously discussing brain-eating prions and government bioweapons, I'm genuinely impressed. That's quite a commitment to staying conscious through discussions specifically designed to be relaxing. Though I suppose talking about zombie deer and rabies might have had the opposite effect than intended. If you're now lying there wide awake, mentally planning your zombie apocalypse survival strategy, and wondering whether that scratch from next door's cat needs urgent medical attention, I do apologise. Perhaps Halloween specials aren't the most conducive to restful sleep, but here we are. I want to say a proper thank you for being here tonight, for spending your Halloween evening, or perhaps the night after, exploring the strange intersection of science and horror with me. Whether you found this video because you're genuinely interested in the science of zombies, or whether you were just looking for something appropriately spooky to fall asleep to and thought, yes, discussions about prion diseases, exactly what I need. Thank you. Your presence here means everything. For those of you who've been with me through my other videos, thank you especially. You keep coming back to these strange late-night explorations of science and mystery, and honestly, knowing you're out there, knowing these videos are part of your routine, that makes doing these videos worthwhile. Now, I'm genuinely curious, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Do you think you'd survive a zombie outbreak? What's your survival plan? Are you a fortify your home and wait it out person, or a grab supplies and head for the countryside person? And more importantly, what did you think of this Halloween special? Was it too creepy? Not creepy enough? Should I do more holiday-themed science videos, or stick to the regular content? I read every single comment, and honestly, your feedback helps me understand what you want from this channel, what brings you back, what keeps you curious. So whether you're still awake or whether you drifted off somewhere around the discussion of cordyceps and are now having vivid dreams about fungi growing from your head, I'm going to leave you with something gentle, some soft, calming ambient sounds to help ease whatever remains of your consciousness into proper sleep. No more talk of prions or rabies, no more conspiracy theories about secret laboratories, just quiet, peaceful sounds to let your mind finally rest after all that darkness. So, sleep well, dear friend, dream peacefully, and I will see you all in the next video. Good night.